The following materials are the testimony of Detective Edwin Morris, the primary homicide detective who investigated the murder of Chris Alexander. It's taken from the first trial of Brandi Alexander that resulted in an overturned verdict. Sit back and listen. See if you can identify some things that he says here that are not available in any other place in the materials that are found within the case file. This is an excellent teaching opportunity for you to realize that just because something's not in writing doesn't necessarily mean that it did not happen. Enjoy. Detective Morris, I'd like to continue with your direct examination talking about your involvement in the Alexander murder trial, all right?
I understand.
I'd like to begin by discussing gunshot residue. How long have you been a detective?
I've been a police officer for 23 years. I've been a detective for 20 years. I've been a supervising detective for 13 years.
So we're talking an extended period of time.
Correct.
In that time, have you had involvement with gunshot residue testing?
Yes.
Have you conducted those sorts of tests?
No, the technician does that.
Have you reviewed the results of the tests?
Yes.
Have you seen training on how the tests are conducted?
Yes.
Have you studied on how you can interpret the information contained within those tests?
Yes.
Have you testified previously at other trials about the effects of gunshot residue?
I have.
Have you also testified about weapons?
I have.
And the ballistics of weapons, how weapons are fired, and things of that nature?
I have.
And are you personally familiar with most of the weapons that are normally in use in Pelican Bay?
I am.
Do you have familiarity with the revolvers?
I do.
What about familiarity with non-revolvers, the type of gas charge weapons like a .45 or a 9mm?
Semi-automatic pistols, yes.
So you've also done work with semi-automatic pistols?
Correct.
And have you done work with those types of weapons involving gunshot residue and ballistics?
Yes.
You have. All right, sir. And have you been accepted previously as an expert in the area of gunshot ballistics and gunshot residue by a court?
Not as a paid expert, but I've testified as an expert for my department.
So as an expert for the state?
Correct.
Now, I want to talk with you about gunshot residue. Gunshot residue is a difficult concept for the layperson to understand. If you could explain to the jury what it is that gunshot residue represents.
Gunshot residue represents the gaseous discharge of the cartridge in the gun when it's fired. The hammer strikes the primer explodes, and that lights off the gunpowder or propellant charge in the gun, which propels a lead slug out the barrel. And the gunshot residue is the ash, basically, of that charge as it explodes. And it comes out of the gun and spreads out in a fine but particulate way in a distinct manner depending on the kind of weapon.
Now, why does the type of weapon affect the way in which the residue spreads out?
Well, for example, in a revolver, it comes out from 3 different points. It comes out from behind the barrel where the revolver, the chamber meets the barrel, and it comes out the front of the barrel. But in a pistol, it comes out only the front of the barrel.
Now, a pistol, we're talking about a semi-automatic pistol.
Correct.
Does that have some effect on how much gunshot residue might be present on an individual who fired one of those weapons?
Yes, it makes a difference on how much would be present and the pattern that it would be on the person.
What type of pattern would you normally see with a semi-automatic pistol?
It would typically be on the hand and the forearm of the shooting hand. And if they are, depending on their stance or how they're holding the weapon, it would be on the forearm and the fingers of their other hand.
Would it make any difference if the individual was or was not wearing gloves?
Well, then the gunshot residue would be on the gloves.
As opposed to the skin?
Correct.
What about if they're wearing long sleeves as opposed to short sleeves?
It would be on the outside of the sleeves.
Now, can you conduct gunshot residue of clothing?
Yes.
And can you do it in a room?
I don't understand.
Like furniture in a room?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
In a car, things of that nature?
Correct. Gunshot residue is not quite a gas. It's more of a very fine powder, and it settles down on whatever, gravity works. It settles on whatever's in the area.
Now, how do the technicians retrieve this gunshot residue? What is it that they do to make it show up so they can tell whether or not it's there?
They use a cotton swab that's been immersed in certain chemicals.
And it pulls it out and there's a chemical reaction?
Correct.
Does the absence of gunshot residue prove that someone did not fire a weapon?
No.
Then what good, from an investigative standpoint, is gunshot residue?
It actually indicates only that a person was present when a gun was fired. If they were standing next to the person who was firing the weapon, they would be just as covered with the gunshot residue as the shooter themselves.
What about if I touch someone who has fired a weapon?
That kind of transfer is possible, but it is not going to be as clearly defined as the person who fired or was standing in proximity to someone.
What's the reason for that?
Well, again, it's a cloud of particulate matter that surrounds the person who's shooting the weapon, as opposed to touching someone who has that particulate matter on them. If you just touch them, if it's just transfer, it would be on the part of you that touched them, your elbows or your fingers.
Now, this transfer theory of gunshot residue, is that going to result in a higher level or lower level, or can you not tell?
Well, it depends on the amount of physical contact between the transferee and the transferor, between the person who was present when the weapon was fired and the person to whom it's being transferred. If they have significant interpersonal contact, then there's going to be more transfer. But if it's casual, then it would be significantly less.
So we've got to look at the particulars of the situation to try to sort out how or why the gunshot residue might be there.
Right. You would test multiple points on the person's body. The technicians are trained to check each finger, the back of the hand, the front of the hand, the wrist, the forearm, the shoulders, the hair.
Now, is gunshot residue something that you can wash off?
Yes. It tends to be somewhat sticky, so to speak, but with enough soap and water, almost anything can be washed off.
Really? So I could fire a weapon, wash my hands sufficiently, and get most, if not all, of the gunshot residue off my hands?
If your goal was to get rid of the gunshot residue, you'd be a little better off using some kind of solvent, mineral spirits or acetone. But several washings with soap and water would certainly dilute what was present.
Well, acetone or mineral spirits will do the smell, wouldn't they?
Yes, but they evaporate and they come off with soap and water quite readily.
They do. Okay. So there are multiple ways to clean it up then.
Correct.
Now, going back to the semi-automatic weapon, a 9mm is a semi-automatic weapon?
Yes,
pistol?
that's correct.
A .45 is a semi-automatic pistol?
Well, no, you can have a .45 caliber revolver or a .45 caliber
now, you're
pistol.
familiar with the photos of the pistol that was owned by the Alexanders, the .45?
Yes.
The one that's missing?
Correct.
Now, that's not a revolver, is it?
That's a pistol.
That's a pistol. And a pistol has the gas cloud discharge. Is it forward or backwards? Which way is it?
It only comes out the barrel, but once it comes out, it expands in all directions.
It expands in all directions. How long does it take that stuff to settle in a room?
Well, the heavier parts settle fairly quickly. It's not like you can fire the weapon and then walk away and avoid the discharge. But the longer you're standing there, the more that's going to be on you. I would say less than a minute to be completely settled.
Now, if someone had fired multiple rounds into a human being from a distance of anywhere from 6 to 15 feet, if I go up to that person after they've been shot multiple times, and I shake that person, if I lay across that person, if I try to move their body or give them first aid, is it possible that I could transfer gunshot residue to my body?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Detective Morris. I have no further questions. I'd like to thank Dave Veenstra, our cop in this particular video deposition. Dave is my research assistant for the second edition of Fundamental Trial Advocacy, and he is simply an outstanding man, a phenomenal research assistant, and just an all-around great guy. If you're interested in the way we do advocacy here at Stetson University College of Law, get on the web, shoot me an email, give me a call. I'd be happy to talk with you about it. Till next time, keep on keeping on. This is Charlie Rose, Stetson University College of Law. We'll see you later. Bye.